Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to ImpactHub Colab, to Pun Talks. That's actually all I want to say. Please welcome Mr. Richard Stallman.
Uh-oh. Oh, there it comes. So, I have some requests for you. First, if you take a photo of me with a mobile device, make sure that geolocation is turned off, that it is not putting the location in the photo. And don't put photos of me in Facebook, Instagram, or WhatsApp. That company is a monstrous surveillance engine, and it can recognize people from the backs of their heads as well as from their faces. So if you put a photo showing somebody else in that company, you are helping it to track that person. That's mistreatment of the person. It's a bad way to treat your friends, and it's a bad way to treat me. Please don't do it. Don't mistreat me that way, and don't help Big Brother track your friends, I hope. Second, if you make a video or audio recording, it looks like somebody's doing that, and you want to distribute copies, please do so only in the formats that are favorable to free software. Those are the OGG formats and the WebM format. Please do not distribute in MP anything, because those formats are patented in some countries. Especially do not distribute in Flash, because Flash requires non-free software to play it. It's a very bad thing for any website to use Flash. Please complain to websites that use Flash. And don't use Windows Media Player, Real Player, or QuickTime. Also, please make sure that normal access to the distribution site for the recording works and it permits downloading a copy without having to run any non-free, without the users having to run any non-free software to do it. And this includes JavaScript code in the web page. Make sure that the site doesn't require users to run non-free JavaScript code in order to see what it distributes. That's the problem with YouTube. YouTube distributes WebM format, which is a good format, but you can't even see it without running the non-free JavaScript code, and that's bad. And finally, please put on the recording the Creative Commons No Derivatives license, because this is a presentation of my point of view. And another request, it's too hot in here. We need some air. Occasionally, windows serve a useful purpose. Please get air circulating, like maybe over here. It's really unpleasantly hot in here already. I'm surprised you didn't start to complain. So, this is about free software and your freedom. What does free software mean? It means frei. It does not mean kostenlos. We're talking about freedom here. The freedom for the users that run the program. That's really important. Denying people freedom is an injustice. We're not talking about price. Whether you pay to get a copy of a program or receive your copy gratis, that's a minor detail. We're not really concerned about that either way. We're concerned about what you get once you get the program. What do you have? Does it respect your freedom, or does it take your freedom away? But what is a program, and what's a computer? Well, a computer is a universal computing device. And conceptually, it's very simple. All it can do is get the next instruction and do what that says, and get the next instruction and do what that says over and over, millions of times a second. the instructions come from the program. So depending on what instructions are in the program, it can make the same computer do anything. Well, not quite anything. There are some things we can't do. But aside from that, the same computer can do any of the things that a computer can do. So who gives the instructions to your computer? You might think it's you, when really it's somebody else. You might think your computer is obeying you, when really it's obeying someone else first, and then it obeys you only when the other chooses to let it obey you. There are two possibilities for each program. Either the users control the program, or the program controls the users. It's always one or the other because there's no other possibility. When the users control the program, that's free software, because that's when the program respects users' freedom. What is freedom? Freedom is having control of your own life, control of the activities you do in your life. Well, if you use a program to do the activity, control of the activity requires control of that program. So when the users control the program, that's when the program respects users' freedom. In order for the users to control the program, they need the 4 essential freedoms. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program any way you wish for any purpose. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the program and change it so it does your computing activity the way you wish. Practically speaking, this requires having access to the source code. Access to the source code is a prerequisite for practically being able to study and change the program. There's some source code. As you can see, it looks like a combination of English and math. If you've learned the programming language, you can understand what that means, and you can change it to do something different. In order to run that program, we convert it into an executable. Here's an executable program, and as you can see, it's a bunch of mysterious, enigmatic ones and zeros. If it's such a small program as this, yes, you could figure out what they mean and what it does. But if it's a large program, say hundreds of thousands of lines of source code, to figure out what the executable does is very difficult. It's exceedingly difficult. It's called reverse engineering. So if users were nominally free to change the program, but they had to do reverse engineering first, that would be bogus. Really, the users would not have the possibility of changing the program. So Freedom 1 includes access to the source code for the users. These two freedoms give the users separate control over the program. That means each user separately is free to change it and run it. So I can change my copies, you can change your copies, you can change your copies, and so on. That's essential, and here we see an illustration. This user is changing the program, while those 3 are using it the way they got it. Separate control is essential, but it's not enough, because most users are not programmers. They do other things. There are many other things for a person to do in life. I wouldn't expect everyone to want to be a programmer or be good at it. But the non-programmers are not going to understand source code, so how can they exercise control over the program? If all they had was separate control, it wouldn't do them any good at all. So we need collective control too, which is the freedom to work with other people, making the program do what you want. At the top, we see a group of users who have decided to collaborate, exercising control over the program. 2 of them are actually changing the program. I suppose they're programmers. They know how. The one on the left is not changing the program. Maybe he's a non-programmer. He doesn't know how to change the program himself, but he can discuss with the other two what changes to make. This is how non-programmers participate in exercising control over the program. The people who collaborate are those who choose to. You're not required to. You're not required to exercise any of these freedoms. You're free to do them if you wish. So here are two more users that are not working with those three. Why not? We can't tell. Maybe they never met each other. Maybe they disagree with those three about what's the right goal. Maybe they just don't get along with those three. Maybe they'll start working together tomorrow, now that I've introduced them. Who knows? The point is, those users who want to work together are free to do so. Collective control requires two more essential freedoms. Freedom 2 is to make exact copies and give or sell them to others when you wish. And freedom 3 is to make copies of your modified versions and give or sell them to others when you wish. These two freedoms enable the users to collaborate when they wish, because if one user in the group makes a modified version, then with freedom 3, she's free to make copies of that and distribute them to others in the group. And they, with freedom 2, can make more copies of that version and distribute them to others in the group until they've all got it. This freedom also allows those users to offer copies to others, even publish them, offering them to the public at large. One part of freedom 2 has a special moral importance, and that is when it is non-commercial redistribution of exact copies, because that is sharing, and sharing is good. Sharing is part of the basis for community. People must be free to share copies of any published work, not just software. Now, freedom to share is a lot smaller than for a work to be free. This is just a part of freedom 2, whereas for a work to be free, it needs all 4 freedoms. But all published works should give the freedom to share. So, when a work comes with these 4 essential freedoms, freedom 0, the freedom to run it as you wish for any purpose. Freedom 1, freedom to study the source code and change it so it does your computing activity the way you wish. Freedom 2, to make exact copies and give or sell them to others when you wish. And freedom 3, to make copies of your modified versions and give or sell them to others when you wish. When the work carries these 4 freedoms adequately, then it's free software and the users have control over it, which is how it should be. But when any of these 4 freedoms is missing or incomplete, the users don't control the program. So instead, the program controls the users and the owner controls the program. So this program, which is non-free or proprietary, is an instrument giving the owner power over the users, unjust power that no one should ever have over anybody else. So any non-free program is already an injustice. Non-free software should not exist. We should get rid of it. We should put an end to that harmful practice. It's predatory. But this injustice typically leads to more injustices, because nowadays the owner is fully aware of the power it exercises over users, which means it constantly feels the temptation to take advantage of the power to mistreat the users for its own advantage. And they do this constantly. It's normal practice now in proprietary software that it is malware. Malware means software designed to hurt the users. Discussions of malware typically have a big blind spot because they focus on viruses and worms, and yes, Those are often malware designed to hurt the user, but they're not the only cases of malware. Software products are commonly malware too. They're also designed to hurt the user. So when we talk about malware, we shouldn't ignore everything other than viruses, as they so often do. What happens is the power that proprietary software owners have corrupts them and leads them to mistreat their own users. So what do? Well, they spy on the user. This is the Amazon swindle. It's a malicious product, an ebook reader made by Amazon, and it spies on the user. From time to time, it sends Amazon the name of the book being read and what page number is being read. It also sends notes. If the user enters any notes, they go to Amazon. If the user highlights any lines, they go to Amazon. Total surveillance of reading. There are spy functionalities in Windows, in Mac OS, in the iThings, in Flash Player, and in nearly all portable phones. There's a remote command to ask for the GPS location. The phone will send that on command. The user can't stop it. Then there's the functionality of refusing to function, of stopping users from doing what they want to do. This is known as DRM, Digital Restrictions Management, or digital handcuffs. I'm not talking about a missing feature here. A missing feature is not in itself culpable. Anybody might get tired and say, I don't want to do any more on this program. If the program is free software, the developer can say, I've done enough. Now, if you want more features, why don't you add them? You can't blame a person for that. If the program is proprietary, that's different. Then the developer says, I'm tired, I've done enough, and you're stuck. You can't add any features to this program. This is part of the fact that proprietary software is always an injustice. It's the absence of freedom won. But this is worse than that. This is not just a feature that isn't there. They've worked for ages, perhaps man years of work, figuring out how to make it impossible for users to do what they want to do. That's digital restrictions management. It ought to be a crime to implement digital restrictions management. Those who make or sell or import products with DRM should be put in prison for that. But they're not. So this example is the notorious Blu-ray that attacks users when they try to make a copy. Of course, it doesn't attack users by shining a Blu-ray at them. That's a joke. That's part of my comedic license. But the fact is, Blu-ray discs have DRM that nobody in the free world has broken. So Blu-ray discs are the enemy of your freedom. And I hope you will learn to see them as this. Every time you see a Blu-ray disc, think, that's the enemy. So that you will never use one. I've never used one. I will only use them if we have the way to break the DRM. We know of DRM, of course, in lots of proprietary products. Windows has it, Mac OS has it, iOS has it. I'm pretty sure Android has the basis for it. And Flash Player has it. The Amazon swindle has it. Then there are back doors. These are functionalities to attack the user. A backdoor allows someone to send a command to the device telling it to do something without asking the user for permission, And of course, often what it does is nasty. So here's the Amazon swindle. It has a back door for remotely erasing books. If snooping on the user and reporting what the user reads is not Orwellian enough, this back door was used for an Orwellian act in 2009 when Amazon remotely erased thousands of copies of a particular book. And what was the book? It was 1984 by George Orwell. This inspired a lot of criticism. So Amazon did something companies often do. It made a phony promise. Amazon said it would never do this again unless ordered to by the state. Now, if you've read 1984, you will not find that promise very comforting. But it was not a real promise anyway. It was not binding. It was just noise that Amazon made to distract the critics, to take away their momentum. And by the time they realized, if they ever did notice, that Amazon had gone back to remotely erasing books for its own reasons, it was too late to resume the criticism. Backdoors are known. Well, backdoors vary because depending on how the backdoor is written, there are various things it can do or not do. Hello? So, we know of a backdoor in the iThings that allows them to, that allows deinstalling apps. And there, but also there is censorship. Apple pioneered censorship of apps. So the iPhone was the first general-purpose computer which did not allow users to install any application program they wished. They could only install the applications approved by Apple from the App Store. And Apple practiced this and still practices this censorship arbitrarily based on commercial interests and political positions. For instance, somebody wrote an app that would present information about civilian casualties from U.S. drone bombings. And Apple refused to put it in the App Store, making various excuses, and eventually said it was for political reasons. By the way, Microsoft imitated Apple in imposing censorship on the App Store. When users figured out ways to evade the censorship and install forbidden apps, they called it jailbreaking, which basically says that they recognize these computers were designed to be jails for the user. So our term for such a computer is jail. Then there's sabotage. Sony sabotaged the PlayStation 3 with a malicious downgrade. Initially, it was sold with two modes of use, either to play games on the gaming network or to run some other operating systems such as gnu+linux. But someone figured out how to break some DRM using gnu+linux, so Sony released a downgrade of the firmware to remove the functionality of running another operating system. Thus, every user had to choose either to install the downgrade and lose the ability to run gnu+linux, or not install the downgrade and lose the ability to play on the gaming network. There's another kind of sabotage which comes from malicious from universal backdoors. A universal backdoor gives someone the power to remotely impose software changes. Windows has a universal backdoor. It's been there since Windows XP, which means that Microsoft could remotely change the software in any way it liked, and users had no way to resist. This means that any malicious functionality which is not in Windows today could be installed tomorrow. In Windows XP, Microsoft never admitted that there was a universal backdoor. People deduced this from observed facts. However, to show how ethical standards keep going down, in Windows 10, Microsoft admits the presence of a universal backdoor and says that this is meant to serve the users better. We know also that the Amazon swindle has a universal backdoor. Nearly all portable phones have a universal backdoor as well. And that has been used to convert them into listening devices. Once the phone is converted, it listens all the time and transmits all the conversation it hears. And you don't have to speak into the phone, into the mic for it to listen to you. It can listen to you across the room. And if you think of getting some privacy back by switching it off, it pretends to switch off, but it keeps really keeps running and listening and transmitting all the time. The NSA has a cleverer version that detects certain keywords so it only transmits the interesting conversations, whatever it considers interesting. Oh, Android has a backdoor that's almost universal. It's in Google Play. Android contains some free components and some proprietary components. Google Play is one of the proprietary components. It's the one that accesses all Google services, including the App Store. And it has a backdoor permitting Google to forcibly install or deinstall any app. Google could write an app just for you and then forcibly install that. I asked an Android expert who said this is not quite as powerful as a universal backdoor, but I'm sure it allows doing various nasty things. Another kind of sabotage, by the way, doesn't depend on any particular functionality in the program. Microsoft, when it finds security bugs in Windows, tells them to the NSA before it fixes them, thus giving the NSA the chance to attack anybody's computer. Do you think the Swiss government should use Windows? So, these examples are enough to demonstrate that if you're using proprietary software, you're almost certainly using some proprietary malware. You're already the victim. Nearly all people that use some proprietary software are victims of proprietary malware. And they don't do this because they're sadists. They're not just drooling for more power. No, they're greedy. They've discovered ways to make more money by mistreating their users, and since they have no scruples against this, they do it. Now, I've told you about some examples of proprietary malware. We know a lot more. Look at gnu.org/proprietary for long lists categorized by type of malware and by which company. But even the dozens of examples we have listed are a tiny fraction of all the proprietary programs in the world. For most of those programs, we don't know anything. We don't know if they're malware or not. With a proprietary program, there are two possibilities. Either we know of a proprietary program, of a malicious functionality, and it's known malware, or we don't know, in which case it's possible malware. But it's impossible to verify the absence of malware. So every proprietary program is either known malware or possible malware. Well, there may be a few exceptions. There are some proprietary programs whose source code is available, and you could theoretically verify them that way. But with normal proprietary software, that's not even a possibility. So it's either known malware or possible malware. You can't have a rational basis to trust it. All you've got is blind faith, often in a company that has mistreated users so much that you've got to be really thick-headed to trust it ever. The only way you can have a rational basis to trust a program is if it's free software. With proprietary software, you're being taken for a sucker. And the developers have so little in the way of ethical scruples, so little shame, that nowadays they have events where they make presentations about their new clever ways of mistreating users. We need to escape from proprietary software and say never again. We need to move to the free world. Now, we built the free world. We built it with the GNU operating system together with the kernel Linux. I started developing GNU in January 1984. I wanted to make it possible to use a computer in freedom. The computer won't function without an operating system. So in order to use the computer in freedom, you need a free operating system. Well, there was none, not for modern computers. So it was my duty to make one. I said, I'm going to make a free operating system if it's the last thing I do. By 1992, I and hundreds of others who had helped develop GNU had nearly all of the necessary components for a free operating system. I wrote some of them myself. I recruited people to write others. In some cases, I convinced people to make programs free. For instance, you may have heard of BSD. In 1984, BSD was a proprietary modified version of Unix. Unix being a proprietary operating system also. Now, wait a second, is there a tea bag in this? What's going on here? Nobody made the tea, it's too late. It's been cooling off for half an hour. Wait, no. Oh, I see. It's tea. It's rather weak, but it does seem to be tea, maybe. Okay. Okay, good. Yeah, it might be good this way. Let me see. It's very interesting tea, actually. Really wonderful tea. So, in '85, I visited the developers of BSD, and I asked them to please separate their code from AT&T's Unix code so they could release their code as free software. And a couple years later, they started doing that. Of course, the reason I asked is I wanted to use their code as part of the GNU system, and we did. And in some cases, other projects released some free software for other reasons of their own. Now, they were not trying to make a complete free operating system. They didn't care about that. but their work contributed to doing so. For instance, the X Window system. By 1992, we had nearly everything, but one essential component, the kernel, was missing. In 92, we were developing a kernel, but it turned into a research project and took many more years to have a test version. But fortunately, we didn't have to wait, because in 92, Mr. Torvalds, who had written a kernel called Linux in 1991 that was proprietary, liberated it. So in 1991, Linux was proprietary. In February 92, he made it free. At that point, it was possible to take Linux and fill the last gap in the GNU system, producing a combination which was basically the GNU system with Linux added. The gnu+linux system, that is. Thus, it became possible to buy a new PC and run it in freedom with only free software. Now, you'll probably hear lots of people talking about the gnu/linux system and calling it Linux. This is really not nice, because it means giving all the credit for our work to somebody else and none to us. And shockingly, there are actually people who do this and feel no shame about it. They've come up with excuses. It's really a bad thing to do to us. Please don't ever do that. Now, if you call it gnu/linux, you're giving us some credit and you're giving Mr. Torvalds some credit. Now, it's true he didn't start his part of the system until 1991, but it is an essential component of the system, so it's fine and proper to give him some credit. Please give us some credit too. In principle, gnu/linux is a free operating system. In practice, that's not always so, because in every variant of the system, the developers of that variant add some more programs. And sometimes among the programs they add, there are some non-free ones. And when they do that, their version of the system is not as a whole free. An operating system is a collection of lots of programs, thousands of programs typically nowadays. And if, in order for a collection to respect your freedom, every single program in the collection must respect your freedom. If there's one program in the collection that takes away your freedom, the collection as a whole takes away your freedom. So, to get freedom, you need to install a variant that is entirely free software. Well, there are over 1,000 of these distributions of gnu/linux, and nearly all of them contain non-free programs because they're developed by people for whom freedom is not an important value. And then there are a few, like 10, that are entirely free software that are developed by people who care about freedom. You can find the list in gnu.org/distros. You can also find an explanation for the widely known non-free distros about very roughly what's wrong with them. The non-free distros do harm in two ways. First of all, many people install them and they don't get all the way to freedom and they don't know it. Now, it's a lot better to install a not totally free distro of gnu/linux than to use Windows or Mac OS. But it doesn't get you all the way to freedom. You've stopped not quite at freedom, and you may not know. Nobody may tell you that there is another step to be taken. But the big problem they do is that some of those non-free distros are very influential. For instance, Ubuntu. Ubuntu has a big negative effect on the community's understanding of freedom. because the developers of Ubuntu not only include non-free software, but they confuse the issue. They offer a long list of optional non-free software, and the ones that are gratis they call free. They're not free software, they're not frei, they're just kostenlos. And those people gratuitously confuse things by calling them free. Now you'll notice I never use the word free to mean kostenlos. I always say gratis when I mean kostenlos. Whenever I say free, I'm talking about freedom. I want to help people recognize the difference between these two concepts. And Ubuntu, they could so easily say gratis or zero price or just zero, but no, they have to confuse things by saying free. And then when you look at what else the developers of Ubuntu say, like about values and what this is all about, they could say, you deserve freedom in your computing and you won't get it from us. But of course they don't say that. Instead they say, we believe we offer you the best possible user experience. So what values does that teach? How do you teach values? By basing your words and your actions on those values so that they're visible in your words and actions. Well, in the words and actions of Ubuntu's developers, you can see value convenience only. Don't think about freedom. Don't think about right and wrong or justice or injustice. Just think about convenience. And they have a lot of influence. By the way, free software is the only known defense against malicious functionalities in a program. Because when the users have control, the users can spot malicious functionality and they can fix it. It's not a perfect defense, but it's a lot better than no defense at all, which is what you have with proprietary software. But it's not perfect, it's not guaranteed. One of the few known examples of free software that snoops on users is Ubuntu's desktop search. Look at gnu.org/philosophy/ubuntu spyware.html. Ubuntu is a blot on the free software community. So complain about Ubuntu and complain to Ubuntu developers until it is fixed. Now, of course, the users used the defense. There is a version of Ubuntu that doesn't snoop, but we really want them to stop making it snoop. Once you've installed a free distro, then you've got only free programs in your machine unless you install some non-free program. But that doesn't necessarily mean you will only run free programs in your machine. Many web pages contain programs. They come in the web pages and your browser installs them silently and runs them. They're installed in the browser. And so you're running those programs. Now, those programs can be free or non-free like any other programs, but usually most of them are non-free. So to protect ourselves from that non-free software, and some of it snoops on users, by the way, we developed Libre.js. Libre.js is an add-on for Firefox which analyzes every JavaScript program that tries to install itself into your browser to see if it's either free or trivial. In those cases, it permits the JavaScript program to run. But if the program is non-free and non-trivial, then Libre.js blocks it and informs you on the screen, and it does one other thing. It searches through the web pages of the site, heuristically looking for where and how to contact the webmasters. If you have ever tried to complain to the webmasters, you know that finding where and how is the hardest part. With Libre.js, that's quick and easy, so complain. The point is, we want you to complain to the webmasters to pressure them to fix this. You can complain in less than a minute. You could, in less than 10 minutes a day, you can complain to 10 different sites. Please do complain. It's very important. We want them to fix this. There is another way you can lose control of your computing. It's called service as a software substitute. What does it mean? It means instead of using a program in your own computer to do your computing job, you entrust it to somebody else to do with his server. Well, then you can't possibly have any control over how it's done. You see, a program and a service are totally different things. They're different kinds of things. A program is a work. It exists in copies. You can have a copy of the program and then you run it. And then if the program is free, you've got control over it. Of course, if it's non-free, you don't have control. That's the older way to lose control of your computing job. But you can never have control over somebody else's service. You don't have a copy of it. It doesn't exist in copies. By the nature of a service, you can't possibly have control over a service that's doing a job for you. So if you use a service to do your own computing job, you have lost control. Therefore, for the sake of control of your own computing, never use a service to do it. It's that simple. A service that offers to do your computing job is a bad thing. The only way you can have control over your computing is to do it in your computer with your copy of a free program or free programs. By the nature of the structure of using a service, using it is equivalent to running a non-free program. But it's actually worse. I explained that many non-free programs spy on the user. They send data to a server. Well, with service as a software substitute, the user, in order to use it, must first send all the pertinent data to the server. It's the same result. A server has the user's data. But it's even worse. Many non-free programs have a universal backdoor with which someone has the power to change the program and thus change how the user's computing is done without asking the user for permission to change it. With service as a software substitute, the service owner or operator at any time can install different programs and should be free to do so. It's his computer. He should be free to change the software running in it. The problem comes from the fact that that server is doing other people's computing, not his computing. If it were doing his computing, it would be good and proper and just that he can change how it's done. But changing how other people's computing is done without even having to ask them is an injustice to them. So SAS, service as a software substitute, is inherently equivalent to running a non-free program which spies on the user and has a universal backdoor. It's the equivalent of non-free malware. And if you don't want to be victimized by it, you have to say no. I should point out that this issue arises when you're doing your own computing. We do other kinds of computing activities. For instance, joint activities, communication. Consider a certain kind of service that many people use, a web search engine. What is that doing? The job it's doing is communication. The user is communicating with all the world's websites. You can't do that inside your own computer. Those websites are not in your computer. to do that job, you have to communicate with others, and it can't be entirely under your control. So you're not losing control if you use, or at least you couldn't have total control. So you can't lose the total control because you're using somebody else's search engine service. It's true that some search engine services might deny you some kinds of control. You might prefer to run your own search engine or visit all the world's websites yourself. But you can't have full control over that because all those websites are participating in the activity, and they're under the control, we hope, of the people whose or organizations whose sites they are. So we want to be free, but we have obstacles to cross. For instance, there are companies that obtain control over users through proprietary software, and they get a lot of money. They use that money to make it hard for people to escape. Sometimes they just spend the money making their systems more convenient. Now, if you value your freedom more than convenience, the convenience is just a trap, because it's discouraging other people from escaping, and there's a danger it might even discourage you from escaping. But there are other kinds of social inertia. There are secret file formats that are supported by proprietary programs, and we can't make free software operate them, handle them, until we find out the file format. .doc file was one of those secret formats. People had to do a lot of work to figure out the file format so that free word processors and free spreadsheets could handle it. And there are other formats that are still secret. We still don't know what they are. A free program can't handle a secret format. If a free program handles the format's not secret. You can look at the source code and see what the format is. But a proprietary program can handle a format that's secret, and the developers do this deliberately to make it impossible to interoperate with their software. Another form of social inertia is when they make special deals with schools and governments to get them to use non-free software. And that means that these organizations fail to do their duty of helping society move to freedom. Paradoxically, in most countries, it's a crime to bribe a politician, but bribing the state is lawful. The company just has to say, we'll give you a bunch of computers, or we'll start a research center in your country or your canton or your state and spend $1 million a year there if you adopt all these policies that favor us at the expense of your citizens. There's no crime if the state agrees to this, but it is corruption. So we have to protest these companies when they appear. If Microsoft or Apple or Amazon or Adobe or many others want to recruit or sell anything, they should be met with opposition. Another obstacle comes from the term open source that you may have heard. The idea of the free software movement is a movement. We are campaigning for users' freedom. We talk about what's right and what's wrong. During the 1990s, in the free software community, many of the people disagreed with our ethical ideas. Although they were part of the community, they were using or developing free software, but they didn't agree with us on ethical questions. So there was a debate between these two political camps. And so people who saw the debate would find out about the free software movement and its ideas. They could think about the question. But in '98, the people who disagreed with us coined a new term that had never been used before, open source. With this term, they then developed a different discourse based on different values. They decided to omit the entire ethical foundation of the free software movement to make a different sort of idea that would not be a movement at all. There is no open source movement, it's the open source non-movement. And that was their purpose, not to have a movement, not to campaign against anything. They don't want to say that anything is wrong. At most, they will make a suggestion. And what do they suggest? It's basically the same thing we campaign for, but for them, it's only a suggestion. We say, if you develop and release a program, it's your moral duty to respect users' freedom to change and redistribute that program. They say, if you develop and distribute a program, it may be in your practical interest to allow users to change and redistribute the program, because then they will improve the code quality. So you see the big differences at the level of values, the deepest level. We say the values are freedom and community, that you have a duty to respect, and they say the values are code quality, that you might want users to improve for you. They don't say that the developers, that users have a freedom that the developers must respect. And that was the whole point, not to say that, because they wanted to win the favor of business executives by never saying anything that business executives might not like. Unfortunately, in 1998, the majority sided with them, and nearly all the businesses that were interested in free software sided with them, and most of the journalists and politicians followed the businesses. And since then, in the English language media, and in many other languages as well, almost always talk about open source and never free software. Since then, we have to work very hard to make the users available, to make the users aware that there is such a thing as the free software movement. Most users who have heard of us think we're doing open source. They have no idea that there's a disagreement between open source and our views, so that it stands for rejection of our views. Every week I get messages from people talking with me about open source from people who think that's what I stand for. It's a painful misunderstanding. I have to respond in a way that gets through their heads so that they realize that that they had been misinformed in a very important way, but I have to avoid hurting their feelings. It's like I have to knock on their heads hard enough to get through, but not so hard they get mad. It's not always easy to do that. But it gets worse. Sometimes I see an article that calls me the founder of open source or the father of open source. Well, I send a letter to the editor saying, if I'm the father of open source, it was conceived through artificial insemination using stolen sperm without my knowledge or consent. Then I present the name of the free software movement and explain what it stands for. And that's the purpose of the letter, to show the readers of that periodical the ideas that were missing from the article they had seen. but I start with a joke because I like jokes. Well, I do all I can, and some other free software activists do all they can, but it's not enough. We need your help. We need you to teach other people that there is a free software movement. Oh, I've seen articles that call free software the precursor or forerunner of open source, as if the free software movement didn't exist anymore. Well, it's still here, but we need you to teach people that. Just by insisting on saying free software, or better, freie Software, because nobody will think that that means kostenlos. So the point is, you can teach them that there is a free software movement and that there are people who support it. And there's an issue that merits their attention, an issue of right and wrong. By doing that, you can help bring more people to support the free software movement. And it's especially important, leaving so soon. I hope it wasn't something I said. So especially when you're in a discussion with other people who are saying open source, you, by insisting on saying freie Software, can show people that this is an issue of freedom. And when someone else argues for doing this because it's more convenient, you can say, but this is not just about convenience. Our freedom is at stake here. Other people's freedom is at stake here. We must do this to respect freedom. And even if you lose the argument on any given occasion, you will have done something very important in education of the public about freedom. Another obstacle is when there's hardware whose specs are secret. And that's quite common. They make the hardware, they sell it to you, or they sell it to somebody else who then sells it to you, and they won't tell you how to use it. Instead, they say, here's a non-free program to use it with. You run it and shut up. But we can't run that. We need to replace it with free software, which means we need reverse engineering. Somebody's got to look at how that non-free program is running the hardware and write down the specs so that someone else can write a free program to run that hardware. This is a hard job, but it can be done, and it's tremendously important. So, schools should teach reverse engineering. Universities, mainly, should teach reverse engineering. It's not only vital to advance our freedom, but it's also a lucrative professional career, and it's strange not to have courses to help people start doing it. Speaking of schools, schools must teach exclusively free software, without exception. They should teach only free software in the classroom, and they should explain in the classroom why they teach only free software. This is a matter of civic necessity, because the users deserve freedom, and the school has a social mission to educate good citizens of a society that is strong, capable, independent, cooperating, and free. In computing, that means graduating skilled users of free software. And the school must never teach the use of a proprietary program, because that's implanting dependence. Teaching kids to use proprietary software is wrong for the same reason that teaching them to smoke tobacco is wrong. No wonder some companies offer big discounts on proprietary software for schools. just as some companies used to hand out gratis cigarettes to children to get them hooked. But the school must never help get the students hooked on, make them dependent on some particular entity. But there's another reason, because the school is supposed to teach people to be good cooperating members of society. So every class must have this rule. Students, if you bring software to class, you may not keep it for yourself. You must share it with the rest of the class, including the source code, in case someone here wants to learn about this program, because this class is a place where we share our knowledge. Therefore, it's not permitted to bring proprietary software to class except to do reverse engineering on it. The school, to set a good example, must follow its own rule. It must bring only free software to class and share copies, including source code, with all that want copies. With the exception of reverse engineering exercises, if any, it shouldn't show the source code for the exercises until after the homework is due. But there's a deeper reason for the sake of education and programming. Every program embodies knowledge. If it's proprietary, that knowledge is secret. It's withheld from the students. A non-free program is the enemy of the spirit of education. It should never be tolerated in a school. But if the program is free, it makes the knowledge available to the student. And this is vital for teaching people to be good programmers. How do you learn to write good, clear code? By reading lots of code and writing lots of code. Only free software gives you the chance to read the code of large programs we really use. Then you've got to write lots of code. If you want to become good at writing the code for large programs, you've got to write lots of code for large programs. But you have to start small, which means writing small changes for large programs. That's how you start to deal with the challenges of the code for large programs. But only free software gives you the chance to write changes for small then bigger in large programs we really use. Every school can offer students the chance to master the craft of programming if it is a free software school. And every school should be a free software school. If you have a relationship with a school, if you're a student, a teacher, an employee, an administrator, or the parent of a student, it's your responsibility to campaign for that school to move to free software. Human rights depend on each other. If we lose one, it becomes hard to maintain the others. But now that we use computing for so many important activities in life, free software, that is, the control of our own computing, has become one of the human rights we need in order to maintain the others. We must fight for these. And that sometimes requires a sacrifice. Sometimes there's going to be something you'd like to do, which would require a non-free program. For your freedom's sake, you should refuse to do it. It's that simple. It's for your freedom's sake. I have no authority unless you choose to listen or heed what I say. It's for your freedom's sake that you should refuse to use the non-free programs, help move society away from their use, develop free replacements, campaign in the free software movement, and so on. There are people who don't value their freedom at all, and they say almost mockingly, yeah, I've tried the free program and it's inconvenient. So whenever you provide me with a free program that's 100% as convenient as this and does all the things it does, then I'll switch. what they're saying is that the size of the sacrifice they would do for freedom is zero because their value for freedom is zero. So, of course, they're not going to have freedom unless they're very lucky. Well, we can't make them change their minds. We can only cite them as examples of being foolish. So how can you help our cause? If you're a good programmer, you can write free software. Contribute first to existing free software projects. Then start a new one. Don't start by writing a new program. You'll probably not contribute anything useful to the world that way. Make many contributions to existing free programs first. Then you'll be ready to start a new project and pick a job that's worth doing and know how to do it. If you're not a programmer, you can organize activism in the free software movement. Spread the ideas. That's tremendously important. So, in fact, that's what we need most. The most important technical contribution you could make is reverse engineering. But being a good speaker and teaching more people to value freedom and to understand the issue is even more necessary. You can persuade schools and governments to move to free software. With regard to governments, look at gnu.org/philosophy/governmentfreesoftware.html. For a long list of specific policies we recommend that governments adopt in order to escape from proprietary software. And why must they do this? To recover their computational sovereignty. A state does its computing for the people, not for itself. If a state, and so a state has the duty to maintain control on behalf of the people of that computing. If it ever uses a non-free program or SAS, it has failed in its responsibility. That's a problem it must correct for the people's sake. And you can help other users. If you're an expert user, join a gnu+linux user group and help other users. That advances the community too. There are more ways to, and also just saying free software, saying gnu+linux. They help us, and they're easy. They don't require any particular skill, only a certain amount of moral firmness. There are more ways to help. Look at gnu.org/help for a list of them. You'll find things that you could do. You can join the Free Software Foundation. You can do that at fsf.org. Or, because I'm here, you have an opportunity to do it in person, paying cash. I basically always pay cash. I don't want to help anybody track me. I have a credit card, but I use it only for airlines. And by the way, it's better to get cash out of an ATM and pay cash than to pay with a credit card. If you get the cash out of the ATM, they know where you were, but they can't tell what you bought. There's one last point I need to make. Switzerland was founded by fighting the aristocrats' armies over and over again for hundreds of years. They kept coming back, and your ancestors kept fighting them off. And then for a while they've left you alone, but not anymore. They're coming back now. You have to fight now. The lords of copyright, with the help of their puppet government in the United States, are trying to impose on you an unjust copyright law, attacking your freedom so that they will have more power in Switzerland. A number of things they're going to do, they want to do if they get their way. They want to impose censorship on the internet, making ISPs block access to foreign sites. They want to make ISPs rat on their own customers so that the publishing companies can sue people who share for hundreds of thousands of dollars, as they've done elsewhere. They want to make libraries pay for permission to lend books, as if libraries had too much support and too many books and basically were thriving completely and were not in any danger. There's another one. Oh, yes, you may have heard of Google's Content ID, which have you heard of DMCA takedown notices, where if you post something, somebody can say he's the copyright holder and demand taking it down, and even if he lied, the thing has to stay down for several days? Well, that's bad enough. It's a system that's frequently used for censorship. You want something to be removed from the web, you falsely claim it's a copyright infringement, and it gets taken down for 10 days or so. But Google tries to recognize automatically anytime something is a copy of something, and it takes things down automatically. Well, this proposed, and it makes lots of mistakes, it's a big annoyance for people. This Swiss law would require everybody that has a platform to post things to use to implement Content ID, and that means it may be basically not even feasible to have a platform for people to post things, unless you're a giant company like Google that can develop a Content ID system. But DMCA is bad enough, but this goes further. You can see the fundamental bad spirit of this law because it refers to sharing as, quote, piracy, unquote. Now, piracy means attacking ships. It's a very bad thing. But sharing copies is good, so we shouldn't call them by the same name. We can be pretty sure there is no piracy in Switzerland. Where would it be? On the lake? I don't think so. What? Oh, but that's not attacking ships. Trains are not ships. Yes, Swiss Pass is an injustice. You should all campaign to demand that they go back to the older kind of Swiss Pass where they didn't track who goes where. Systems of massive surveillance endanger democracy. For more information, see gnu.org/philosophy/surveillance-vs-democracy.html. That presents and gives the reasons for the absolute limit on the amount of the level of surveillance that can coexist with democracy. Too much surveillance, democracy is dead. And we unfortunately now suffer from too much surveillance, and democracy is going to be dead if we don't knock it back down. But getting back to the copyright law proposals, after going on at such length about the importance of serving the authors and artists, then they proposed to betray the authors and artists by allowing companies to disregard our license conditions where we give permission for use of a work, but in certain conditions about how. Well, this law would permit every collecting society to give a blanket license to any user, any business that wants to redistribute, like a license for all books, or a license for all music, or a license for all videos, or whatever it might be. And this license would allow the company to use any published work on the sole condition that it pay. And this means Creative Commons licenses would be negated. They wouldn't have to obey the Creative Commons license. And all of these things are bad, and this project should be rejected. There are a couple of good things in the project, but they're separate. They could be enacted separately. There's no need for these bad things to do any good things. What should be changed in copyright law? Well, they should legalize sharing, which is non-commercial redistribution of exact copies. They should legalize sharing of copies of any published work. Furthermore, they should make it a crime to distribute or make, sell, import, etc., anything with DRM. Make DRM go to prison. And the contracts that so many companies make people sign, companies like Apple and Amazon and Spotify and Netflix, that give the user less freedom than copyright law gives to users, they should be made legally void. No matter where they were signed, they should be legally void in Switzerland. I also recommend 2 additional ways that we can support artists. New systems of supporting artists that are compatible with legalizing sharing, because they don't depend on stopping people from sharing. With these systems in effect, every artist will say, please share copies of my work, because they'll expect to get more money if you do. Look at gnu.org/philosophy/copyright-vs-community.html. Other interesting things in gnu.org include gnu.org/licenses for information about the various free and non-free licenses and why some free licenses differ from others, what's good or bad about them. In gnu.org/licenses/license-recommendations.html, you can see our guidelines for how to choose the license for your project depending on the circumstances. In gnu.org/gnu, you can see information about the history of GNU. In gnu.org/distros, you can find out about the free and non-free distros. In gnu.org/philosophy, you can see lots of articles about various issues, philosophical, ethical, and political, pertaining to free software. And in gnu.org/help, you can see the list of ways to help us. Now it's time to present my other identity. You know, it's strange, but in the past few weeks, I've always found it hard to find the other sleeve. I am Saint Ignatius of the Church of Emacs. I bless your computer, my child. Emacs started out as a text editor, an extensible text editor that I had written, that developed over the years into a way of life for many users, as it was extended so much they could do all their computing without ever exiting Emacs. Then it became a church with the launch of the news group alt.religion.emacs, which you might find amusing to visit. In the Church of Emacs, we have a great schism between several versions of Emacs. And we also have saints, but fortunately no gods. Instead of gods, we adore the one true editor, Emacs. To be a member of the Church of Emacs, you must pronounce the Confession of the Faith. You must say, there is no system but GNU, and Linux is one of its kernels. Then if you become a real expert, you can celebrate that with our ceremony, the Fu Bar Mitzvah, in which you chant a portion of our sacred scriptures, that is to say, the system source code. In the Church of Emacs, we have eliminated the priesthood of technology. Everyone is free to read our sacred scriptures. We also have the cult of the Virgin of Emacs, which refers to anyone who has never used Emacs. And according to the Church of Emacs, offering someone the opportunity to lose Emacs virginity is a blessed act. We also have the Emacs pilgrimage, which consists of invoking all the commands of Emacs in alphabetical order. There is a breakaway Tibetan sect which claims that it's sufficient to invoke them automatically under the control of a script. But the Mother Church holds that to gain spiritual merit, you must type them by hand. The Church of Emacs has certain advantages compared with other churches I won't name. For instance, to be a saint in the Church of Emacs does not require celibacy, but it does require living a life of moral purity. You must exorcise whatever evil proprietary operating systems have possessed computers under your control or are set up for your regular use, and then install a holy free operating system where holy can be spelled more than one way. And then use and install exclusively free software with and on the system. If you make this vow and you live by it, then you too will be a saint and you'll have the right to wear a halo if you can find one, because they don't make them anymore. There is a traditional rivalry between Emacs and the other text editor VI. So occasionally people have asked whether in the Church of Emacs the use of VI is a sin. It's true that VI is the editor of the beast. But using a free implementation of VI is not a sin, it's a penance. 2 years ago, I went to China, and I was amazed that some VI users proposed getting together to attack me. I was shocked, but apparently violence begins with VI. People have occasionally asked whether my Halo is really an old computer disk. This is no computer disk, this is my Halo. But it was a computer disk in a previous existence. Thank you. Now it's time for the auction. This is the first edition of my book of essays, Free Software, Free Society. So I'm going to auction it for the benefit of the Free Software Foundation. And if you buy it, I can sign it for you. When you bid, please wave your arm and shout the amount. Don't wait till I look at you to shout. Shout first so that I will look at you. Okay, I've got 50, but I got to tell you more. I'm not ready to start yet. We can accept payment in cash with a credit card if it can make international purchases by phone, or with Bitcoin if you have something to send it with here. And since I'll be answering questions for quite a while, you'll have time to go to an ATM and come back with cash. So you don't need to have the cash in your pocket right now. You can bid and then go get it and come back. So I've got 50 francs. Do I get 55? 100, did you say? I couldn't hear, you see. I have hearing trouble. I've got 100. Do I get 110?
120.
Who's speaking? Wave. I've got 120. Do I get 130? I've got 120. Do I get 130? 130. How much?
50.
I've got 150. Do I get 160? 160 for this adorable book. 160 to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom. How much? I've got 200. Do I get 220? I've got 200. Do I get 220 for this adorable book? 220 to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom. Last chance to bid 220 or more.
220.
Who's bidding? I've got 220. Do I get 240? I've got 220. 240. Do I get 260? I've got 240. Do I get 260 for this adorable book? 260 to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom. How much? I've got 260. Do I get 280? I've got 260. Do I get 280? Last chance to bid 280 or more for this adorable book. Last chance to bid 280 or more to the Free Software Foundation to Defend Freedom. Last chance. Going. Who said what? What did you say? Yeah, I got two. Yeah, that's what it is. 260. Do I get last chance to bid 280 or more? Please be silent if you're not bidding. Last chance to bid 280 or more. Going. Okay, I've got 300. Do I get 330? Do I get 330 for this adorable book? What? 330 I'm asking for. I don't want to go up slowly because then it would take us too long. What? I've got 330. Do I get 365? 365 for this adorable book. 365 to the Free Software Foundation to Defend Freedom. Do I get 365 or more? Last chance to bid 365 or more. Last chance to bid 365 or more. Going. I've got 400. Do I get 450? I've got 400. Do I get 450 for this adorable book? 450 to the Free Software Foundation to Defend Freedom. Last chance to bid 450 or more. Do I get 450 or more? Last chance to bid 450 or more. Going. Sold for 400. How do you wish to pay? Okay, do you have it now or you want to go and get it? Then you should go now. You should go now, and now it's time for questions. I still have hearing trouble. My trouble is recognizing consonants. For me to hear you, you need to speak loud, slowly, and clearly, pronouncing each consonant carefully. By the way, we're still giving away the stickers back there and selling merchandise. Jeannie, are you there to sell the merchandise? Good. So you can buy merchandise back there. It's much cheaper. We've got little buttons for 2 francs. You can support the Free Software Foundation that way and state your support for our cause. So, questions?
Today, data is almost as important as software, but data is rarely free.
I don't know what you mean by data. That's too vague. What data?
For example, 3D images of characters in movies. And
well, you don't use those characters to do jobs in your life. They're things to look at, but they don't do a job for you. So I would say those are artistic objects. They're not functional, useful objects. The argument doesn't apply to them. Remember, the argument is freedom includes control of the activities you do in your life, which requires control of the instruments you do them with. Well, that only applies to works that are made to do practical jobs. Doesn't apply to aesthetic, artistic works. It doesn't apply to statements of opinion.
So what do you think about research data that was publicly funded not being free and available for the better of the community?
Well, usually, indeed, it should be published, unless there may be exceptions, though. If it's personal data, it should be private.
True, but it is not.
Then it should be published. Well, scientific research should be available to everyone. And since we see that publishing scientific articles under Creative Commons attribution leads only to good results, all scientific work should be published that way. If there's any software that was used to do the scientific work, that should be released as free software.
Yeah. How can we keep the freedom and have people being in a safe environment?
I don't understand what that means. You seem to be trying to talk about two unrelated subjects as well.
No, they are related.
Safe from what? The way to be safe from malware is reject proprietary software.
Safe. Let's say you have a fire protection system here, and it will help us if some fire breaks out here in this area.
Yeah, that's a useful program, I guess. Get to the point, please.
If people will replace pieces of this software, and I would really like that people are able to replace, let's say, gnu+C or
Sorry, it's not clear what scenario you're talking about. Are you running this software for your building to protect your building from fire? Okay, well then you should have control over what's in that software. Now, you might choose not to change it. You might decide not to change it because you don't want to mess with it. Fine, you have the right not to change it.
detect it, or
I can't understand you.
so let everybody that has a fire detection system in-house, let's change their
They should be free to change it. And probably they won't change it unless they've got an important reason, and probably they won't change it themselves, but rather they might use somebody's modified version.
Do you think it might be a good way to use a modified version of somebody?
Why not? Sure, of course. But the more risky the job is you're doing, the more careful you will have to be when you decide whether to use a changed version. For instance, if you're a surgeon deciding whether to use a changed version of a program as part of an operation, well, you will be liable if you screw up. You're going to be very careful before you accept a changed version, but you should be free to do so. It shouldn't be somebody else saying you can't change it.
Do you like to have a sign on such a building where the fire alarming system has been modified?
There's no need. There's absolutely no need. I can't imagine what bizarre paranoia would lead you to think that.
If just somebody has changed the fire alarming system.
It doesn't matter. It's the building owner. The building owner is responsible for many, many things that affect fire safety. And this is just one more.
So we just take the building owner in charge to manage this?
Yes, just as so many other things. I don't know what you mean by exchangeable. There's maybe a confusion there. I don't know what you're talking about.
Let's say have a GPL version.
I think people.
Piece software.
Sure, you should.
On such a system like a car or a self-driving car.
Of course. You know, people who own cars work on all sorts of the mechanical parts of the cars, including the engines, the transmissions, the brakes, the mirrors. That's right. Absolutely. 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 I don't know where you got this bizarre idea. I don't know where you got the bizarre idea that people should not be allowed to modify their cars. It's never been adopted. This has never been adopted for physical parts of the car. Why should the computer parts of the car give the car owner less freedom than the physical parts of the car, which, of course, are also needed for safety? The car has to be roadworthy. I don't know about here, but in where I live, cars are inspected for roadworthiness, and if you modify the car, you'll have to get it inspected. But there's nothing that says modifying cars is forbidden.
But you would have to get your car inspected
Yes, right.
when you are modifying your car.
That's right.
Yep. That's cool.
Another question. You mentioned the convenience trap. Do you have any advice how to escape this convenience trap?
Well, it takes moral firmness. When I look at a non-free program, I feel such revulsion that it wouldn't occur to me to decide to use it because it's convenient. I wouldn't think of that I'd be getting anything. I think of what I'd be losing.
So why are you using an ATM?
I don't own the ATM. I'm not running any of that software.
I don't own Adobe either.
You don't understand. The ATM is a computer that belongs to the bank. I'm not the one running that software at all.
Just as software as service.
But you see, the activity, remember, I didn't say anything about software as a service. I talked about service as a software substitute. Please listen, you're not being coherent. You've raised issues in a scattered way, several different issues, and you keep bringing up different issues so fast you're not giving me any chance to respond to them. That's unfair. I can respond to each one of these different points you've made, but it takes me time. You can bring up a confused issue in 5 seconds. I can't explain it and clarify it in 5 seconds. So you're being abusive. So shut up and let me try to deal with some of the many issues that you have raised. Don't say any more. I have to answer the questions you've brought up. Shut up and let me answer them. Shut up and let me answer. You're just being offensive by bringing up more different issues and not giving me a chance to respond to any of them. You've misrepresented the things I've said. Maybe that was an accident, but I don't think so. I think you're being a wise guy. So, I said that if you let somebody else's server do your own computing activity, then you lose control of that activity to whoever runs the server. But communications activities are different because you can't have total control over your communication with others. Well, when I withdraw money from the bank through an ATM, that's communication. That's not my own computing activity. That's my communication with the bank, which I can't do inside my computer. I have to communicate with the bank. So this is the kind of scenario that I explicitly said I was not talking about. So don't say I'm contradicting myself. I paid careful attention to these distinctions, and you did not. And then you're trying to pretend that I'm using the software in the ATM, but that's nonsense. I'm just typing at someone else's computer for a couple of minutes. Now, sometimes I ask people, can I browse on your computer? And maybe I'll browse for half an hour, maybe even an hour. It's unusual. But during that time, I have no right to change the software in that person's computer. It's not mine. I'd be a real jerk if I tried to change the configuration at all. So, indeed, when I use someone else's computer for half an hour or a couple of minutes, that's totally different from from my computer. I don't deserve to have control over the software in the ATM just because I'm interacting with it for a couple of minutes. Now, if the bank was going to give me a computer to have and use for a year, or if a school were going to lend me a computer to have and use for a year, that's different. When you're using it for that long, you deserve control over it, just as if it were your property. But when you use it for just a few minutes, it's a different kind of issue, and no, you don't deserve control over it. If you lent me your computer to browse with for a few minutes, I would not try to change the software in it, and it would be wrong if I did. It's my computer that I should have control over, not yours, not the bank's either.
I know some people from the
non-priorities.
From the what?
No-priority. So,
From the now bit?
no non-priority, no-propriety software.
Well, that's the free software world.
Yeah, so they tend to use open source and not free software. My question is, why so many people don't care about it?
Well, first of all, we don't know whether they've even heard of free software. Do they? Well, then have you asked them what their views are? Because some people say open source and their ideas are sort of mixed up. I don't know them. I don't know what they think. But you could ask them what they think. You could ask them why they choose to say open source rather than free software. Or actually, you should say freie Software, because you want them to use the clearer German word rather than the ambiguous English word. But, you'll find they'll tell you what they think and why. If I don't know why.
They like to use and share it.
They what?
They like to use and share it.
Well,
So,
who knows? The point is, I don't know the thoughts of people I've never met or talked with, but it's for the way we teach others to think about freedom is by showing we care about freedom. And you have an opportunity to do that with them. If you do that in your life and hundreds of people see where you stand, you'll influence some of them, and that's good. We have a long way to go. With so much of our society teaching people to value only immediate convenience. Wait, who's that? Who's waving? Oh, okay. Happy hacking. So, it's more important to think about how can I have a useful influence rather than why don't they already agree? You had a question?
Yeah, actually 2 questions. First is very short. Do you use a mobile phone?
No. They're tracked everywhere, and they can be remotely converted into full-time listening devices. So I consider them Stalin's dream. There are some things that are so outrageous and horrible that it's out of the question to accept them or tolerate them.
Okay. Second, what's your stand on BSD, MIT, and similar open source licenses?
Well, first of all, I don't know why you're asking me about open source. I don't care about open source. I'm not a supporter of open source. So please formulate your question without using the term open source.
Would you accept there is a difference between, there is collision between freedom of the user and developer of a software system?
No. I don't think so. After all, developers are users, and there's no such thing as the freedom for the developer to oppress users. So making a program non-free is wrong, and nobody deserves the freedom to do that. Nobody's entitled to be able to do that. But that's not quite because previously you raised the question of certain licenses. But that's a different question. I think I can guess which question you're really trying to raise. You've heard about certain free software licenses which are lax permissive licenses. They permit too much. In fact, they permit middlemen to make the program non-free. Now, they are free licenses because they do give everyone, the license itself gives people the 4 freedoms. It's a free license. If a developer D releases the program under one of those pushover licenses, as I call them, and you get it from D, you get the 4 freedoms. It is free software. D is not doing anything wrong to anybody. What D is doing is making a mistake. In most cases, it's a mistake. There are a few exceptions where it's actually the best thing to do. But usually it's a mistake, and the mistake is that D doesn't know how to say no to others who want to convert the software into proprietary programs and thus deny freedom to other users. D ought to say, no, you can't do that with my code. You must respect their freedom also. But if D chooses one of those pushover licenses, D is saying, I'll just let anybody do anything to anybody. Now, there are a few special cases where that's actually the best thing to do for strategic reasons. If you look at gnu.org/licenses/license recommendations.html, you'll see where they are. But usually it's you should use a copyleft license that requires all modified programs to be free as well. So if somebody says, hey, but I wanted to turn your code into non-free software and you're denying my freedom, that's not freedom. What they want to do is oppress people, and nobody's deserves the freedom to oppress others. I have a haiku to describe their point of view. Using GPL is encroaching on our rights to encroach on yours. So they want to deny freedom to other users. They want to make the program into something that won't come with the 4 freedoms at all. And then they complain that we have given them the 4 freedoms, but not permission to do what they want. So they're complaining about requirements in our license, and they want to re-release our code under a much more restrictive license that doesn't give people the 4 freedoms. So they are being hypocritical, and we shouldn't cater to them. Now, I should point out something. There's no such thing as the Berkeley license. Misunderstanding, there are 2 different BSD licenses. And the difference is important, so read about them in gnu.org/licenses. There's no such thing as the MIT license either. They're talking about 2 different licenses. Look at the data there. There are many other lax permissive pushover licenses. When you're going to use a lax permissive license, the one we recommend is the Apache 2.0 license. There is a difference between it and the others. It's a patent defense clause, which may do some good in some cases. In the back there.
Well, this is a rather technical question. Maybe you don't know too much. So I've been designing parts of microprocessors in the past, and a friend of mine is also designing microprocessors. And he actually does as an experiment to understand the limits and the possibilities. He designs tiny changes in the microprocessor, put in there.
Can he actually make these microprocessors that are changed?
Yes.
How?
They change a few transistors, and
so there are things in the chip that you can change.
yeah, well, we design them, so we make a layout.
Oh.
We send them to a foundry, say IBM.
So you're getting your chips made. What's the question?
The question is, do you see a threat in hardware to the freedom?
Well, first of all, you're making this hardware for your private use, so it doesn't raise any issues. Make whatever you like. Like if you write a program to run it yourself, that only concerns you. You're not doing any wrong to anybody else. Do what you like.
The question is different. Say in your computer.
With hardware, if we're using chips made in a factory, basically, when you're using something physical that's made in a factory, you don't have any control over how it's made. So it doesn't really matter whether the plans are free or not. But someday we'll be able to fabricate these things for ourselves, and then we will absolutely need free plans to fabricate from. So when we can make our own chips, a non-free chip design will be an injustice, just as a non-free program is an injustice.
I like the but making a foundry 14 nanometer, like open, I think it's hard. But apart, that was not the question. The question is, do you see a threat from this hardware field?
Well, we know that. Intel processors today are basically designed with a back door that runs all the time, can talk over the net when you thought your computer was switched off. It's basically designed to attack you. You can't trust at all the latest generation of Intel chips.
Do you see a solution to that?
Someday, when we can fabricate our own chips, it'll be a solution. Until then, we have to hope we can find something that isn't as bad.
But then we will have mechanical calculators and mechanical computers.
I don't know. I doubt it, actually.
I'd like to change the software of my devices at home.
You'd like to change what?
The software of my devices at home. But maybe I use software that is non-functional, or I just...
Then it won't work.
Yes, of course. But maybe I burned down my house.
What?
Maybe I burned down my house because...
Well, that's ridiculous. Why would that happen?
Maybe overheating or something like that. So my question is...
Well, you could burn down your house by starting a fire. So basically, no, that's not a reasonable excuse. And they should design these products so that changing the software won't make them dangerous. In any case, I wouldn't want software in my devices that was proprietary if it could talk to anything. Now, I have a microwave oven, and I don't know if it has a program in it, because I couldn't tell whether it's a program on a processor or a special purpose chip. And since I can't tell, it makes no difference. So I don't need to know whether it's a processor with a ROM or not. But when the device can talk to something, then if it's proprietary software, you've got to assume it's designed to spy on you and attack you. And you can't trust it. In other words, the so-called Internet of Things is the Internet of spies, telemarketers, and cheaters.
I have a follow-up question on that. So you're saying when you're using hardware and it doesn't communicate with the outside world, that's fine. Where's the line between that and now using this upcoming technology of containerizing for security software?
I don't know what that means. I'm sorry. You just changed the subject out of the blue, and I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, I can put software into jails, right, and control the communication that happens between it and the outside world. And
that might be something okay to do, but if it's a proprietary program, you still don't control what it does. And that might be a fine way to investigate it, something for part of reverse engineering. But if you were going to let it actually control something that mattered, it's not entirely in a sandbox. If it's entirely in a sandbox, whatever it does, all it can do is be observed by you. You could study it. And as long as all you do is study it, it can't really affect anything except what you learn. But if you're going to be doing this for production, that is for real use, you have got to let its outputs control something. And if you're letting those outputs control something, that means the something is being controlled by a program you don't control. You might be able to stop it from spying on you. If you let its outputs control your thermostat, but you don't let it talk to anything else in any other way, I guess it won't be able to send temperature data to somebody else. It will only be able to adjust the heat of your house. But why not use free software, and then you'll have control over what sets up the heat, what determines the heat of your house. It's just, if you wanted to control that, you'd have to do it by fiddling with the temperature readings it was getting. You want to make things cooler, start claiming that the temperature is hotter than it really is. You want to make things warmer, you're going to have to give it a temperature value below the real one.
if all programs were free the way you define it, how do you see today's IT industry? What would it look like?
Well, most of it would be the same because most of it is developing programs for a specific client to run in-house. And there's no need for that business to change at all. The developers just have to make sure that they hand over all the code as free software. And they'll do the same exact job and they'll get paid just the same.
So for free programs that are very big and complicated and have international attention, like kernels, office suites, and so on. So how can we effectively check that they are really free? Because the codes are long.
Sorry, how can you check that they're really free? That's easy. You just check their licenses and verify that what you're getting is the source code. How do you check whether they are correct? That's a different, is that what you mean? That's a different question.
Yeah, so how to check in practice for big.
Oh, well, first of all, people do check more or less, but that's not guaranteed. But if the users want to organize to check them more, the users can assemble funds to pay people to just systematically check them. And you can check them as much as you wish. Want to check them more? Put in more money.
But is this being done for like...
To some extent, yes. Not as much as I wish it were.
Yeah, I have a question about software as services as a software substitute. Given like at a small group have its own server running on free software and have its own services there, free software as well.
That's fine.
That's fine for you.
Yeah, because that's just a matter of you have several computers and which parts of the job do you want to do on each one. They're all under your control anyway, so however you set it up, that's not an ethical issue, that's just a practical question.
There's been a big scandal just a few months ago with Volkswagen and their emissions cheating. And this, I mean, this is probably the biggest example of hidden software in a device that people use every day. So my question is, how does the FSF capitalize on this? Have you used this?
We haven't been able to use it very much. And part of that is because it's true that that program is non-free software, and it's true it was developed as malware by its developer. But it's a complicated issue. Cars are a complicated issue. Now, we believe the software in cars should be free. It might be the case that if you change software in certain computers in a car, it should set an indicator flag saying that you need to get it inspected. But you should be free to change it. And the current design of the buses in cars is really stupid. It's easy for any computer in the car to make the bus hang up and block communication between other computers. That's just bad design. They should design the hardware of these buses so that there's no danger of that. So that no matter what computer A does, computer B and C can always talk to each other. And the worst that A can do by screwing up is that it won't do the right thing. But the other parts of the car will always work right. This is a matter of how to connect them. They're using a packet switch network. It's the wrong thing to do.
I mean, I've seen a lot of other community groups that are campaigning on this issue, like there are consumer advocacy groups that are doing lawsuits. Is FSF aligning with any of these?
No. Reducing pollution is outside the FSF scope. The FSF's purpose is to campaign for users' freedom in their computing. We also support basic freedoms in digital activities, things like freedom of speech. Environmental activism is beyond what the FSF's charter says it can do.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting environmental activism, I'm just suggesting raising the issue that free software would have headed off this problem before it happened.
Well, it's not clear it would have. You see, the users might have been perfectly happy with that software and might never have changed it. I suspect that that software provided some benefit to the driver. It made too much pollution, but maybe it gave better gas mileage. And so the users might never have messed with it. Free software is not a guaranteed defense. It's a defense. It gives us the chance to stop software from being designed to mistreat us. But that doesn't mean just because a program is free, it will do exactly what we want. This is the last question because it's getting late.
Yeah, so this free software talks a lot about modifying and having access to source code. So what do you think of people that don't read or cannot understand source code?
Well, I said, I talked about that in the talk at length.
So do they have to learn? Do they have to trust a little bit?
No, I said that they, do you remember what I said? No, sorry. Oh, too bad. Well, what I said is they can work with groups of other users to ask for the changes they want.
And trust them.
Well, you got to trust somebody in life, but at least this way you can choose which other people you wish to trust. And they have no particular interest in cheating you. Today, you have to choose, you have to trust the software's developer that does have an interest in cheating you.
One more question then, since this was a non-question.
Okay.
I was wondering, you mentioned that standing up for freedom requires sacrifice.
Sometimes.
Yes, and I guess determination and courage. So kudos to you, but it seems like nowadays the majority of people in Western societies they'd rather choose the golden cage with the air conditioning and the surveillance cameras.
Well, we can change that to some extent. You can change that about you. There's no point moaning about the shallow thinking of many people. Let's look for ways to change it.
Yes, that's that's the question. Like, what kind of ways do we have to convince people?
Well, you've seen what I use to try to convince people. You can try this, and you can try varying it. You can show them your example. You won't convince everybody, but you'll have an influence on some people. So go to it. Go to it. I don't want to answer. I'm sorry. I'm not going to. It's too late. It's time for me to go. No, it's time for me to go. Sorry. People will keep saying one more, one more, one more. So, it's time for me to sell the book. Please come up.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. One last thank you to Richard Stallman. Yeah.